China's economy grew at its slowest pace in a year in the third quarter. Many nations would be happy with 5% growth, but for China, that's rather disappointing. Or is it? Is it still considered realistic, or is it an over-ambitious target? What's your opinion on the state of the economy, given that China hasn't yet succeeded in tackling the structural problems in its economy? What do you make of the five-year plan?
Well, Adrian, the five-year plan that we think is going to be put in place now is doubling down on both the good and the bad of the previous five-year plan. We see that China really has successfully become the manufacturing behemoth of the world, and now that it still needs to grow itself because the domestic demand has been so pathetic. The need to double up on exports means that the rest of the world is going to have to absorb the excess production out of China. So when you said earlier that when China starts to change its production, the rest of the world feels it. Right now, the rest of the world is somewhat trembling over the fact that it's going to have to absorb yet more Chinese exports. And within the Chinese economy, domestic consumers are not getting enough income and feel safe enough about their future and their Social Security and retirement that they all are excessively saving rather than consuming. Consumption in China right now is 40% of GDP compared to 70 or 60% in the rest of the world. So China really has a lot of imbalances right now, and the new five-year plan has to make a lot of changes to the previous era in order to correct the income imbalances, the regional imbalances, and the production imbalances, where we see companies that are just engaged in massive competition to try to knock each other out. So there are managerial governance issues within China, and dealing with the imbalance that have come from the era of rapid growth is something that the planners are going to have to do in the future.
What do you make of what William was saying there? China's factories, of course, kept the country on track to reach this year's growth target, powered by the exports that Louise was talking about there. Can China sustain all of that when it's facing a trade war with the US?
Century. But furthermore, I think China is willing to invest globally, like what Japanese did in the 80s and 90s, so that Chinese can set manufacturers centers in different parts of the world, including US and Europe, so that they can create local jobs and generate the revenues and of course also softening those trade tariffs. So those are the things that we need a stable global environment, and we need a more friendly geo-economic environment. Otherwise, China would be a supply and value chain center for the world, because out of the 10 largest container ports, 7 of them are in China, and plus on top of that, China generates about 30 million college graduates each year. So this synergy of China that working very effectively for the world is really going to take place. But I think, there's 3 phases of China's open up. In the 80s and 90s, China was in China for China, the business company in China. In the 90s and 2000, it was in China for the world. China became a manufacturing center of the world. But now this century from 2021 for the next 5 years, China will be in world for the world. So I think that year is coming. China is going to massively invest around the world, and then that's going to solve all those complaints and problems, and Chinese company will be welcomed everywhere, including the BRICS countries, especially. So I think this, let's generate a more friendly geopolitical environment. That's the most important thing we need to do, rather than competition, sanctions, trade war, and of course all those tariffs escalating on each other. So we need a peaceful, stable environment, like Rubio, Secretary Rubio said, let's create a strategic stability between US and China. And then that's really what we want. And then that can benefit the world.
You can see William shaking his head. He disagrees with that assessment. William, why? I mean, are Donald Trump's tariffs actually working as intended? How much of a trump card, if you like, are rare earth minerals? To what extent is China holding the US hostage economically at the moment?
Louise is describing the world as it is, which is that China is the major manufacturing supply center of the world, and it's mainly having to export. But I think what Mr. Wong has just described is the world that both Donald Trump and President Xi want, which is a movement not of goods and services, but a factor of production, capital moving from country to country, investing in Europe, say, to produce more automobiles within Europe, employing more European workers. That's the world that both President Xi and Donald Trump want. And in fact, when you say Donald Trump's tariff policies, I think I would really ask you to reread his policy pamphlets again and see that he has investment policies. He has said we're reducing the size of government, we're lowering taxes, we're having fewer regulations so that foreign investors can invest in the United States, and we will give you, to protect your investments and the extra jobs that you're creating in the United States, a tariff barrier to protect you from unfair competition. So the emphasis of President Trump's policies has been invest in the United States. And that's exactly what Mr. Wang just said. China wants to invest, but somehow it has not gone to do that. It has really gone to produce more goods and services to dump into the rest of the world. Now, granted, the Belt and Road countries and some of the countries in Eastern Europe have been recipients of capital, and they have really built a lot of car factories. But the car factories are not to be sold within Eastern Europe. They're to be sold in Western Europe. And that's where the EU is resisting. And similarly, in the United States, we're trying to have more safe and sounder supply chains that don't depend on China for critical pharmaceuticals and critical rare earths. But at the same time, China says, oh, but if you use any of our technologies, we're going to have to license you first and be the controller of who gets access to that technology. So not only can the West not accept, not only does the West not receive investments from China, China's going out of the way to make it more difficult to use the advances that China has produced in the production of stuff in the rest of the world.
Well, let's put that to Mr. Wang. What do you make of that? What is China's strategy to insulate itself from the trade war, first and foremost? And will President Xi throw real policy weight behind his plans to rebalance the economy towards domestic consumption, the shift that could address years of trade imbalances that have hollowed out manufacturing around the rest of the world?
Well, I don't think so. Actually, I think that, China was the first victim of this U.S. trade war, started with his first term of Trump 9 years ago. I mean, but China become much more resilient now. China becomes more, really the only country stand up against this kind of bully. And but also you can see that after all those years of China development, China has been sanctioned for 9 years now. And then for the first time, China re-sanctioned back. And then so the first time for the U.S. to become a receiving end of this tariff and sanction that they've been practicing for over years. And then so they see the war is not functioning like that. We cannot sanction each other. So I'm sure the summit is going to happen in Kuala Lumpur and the end of the month in Korea would probably soften this both camps, because now we are in each other's shoes now. We perfectly understand the condition, the feeling, and then the agonizing process we're going through. So I think China and the U.S. as being the two largest economy in the world, has the moral responsibility to safeguard the global market and things like that, and the prosperity for the world, and also peace, making peace in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Korea, in everywhere. So from that point of view, I think that the U.S. now realize, it may not be a good policy to really hammering and keep sanction China. China can sanction back. So which is going to hurt the U.S. and hurt everybody else. So that's not really good. And now we have to talk, calm down. I think there's also some negotiation, bargaining chip there. But I think now it's time that we come to the real stability. And like Rubio mentioned, we need to seek the strategic stability rather than strategic rivalry. I think that's probably the right way to go. And then really for that, I think China and the U.S. has to realize, we have to work together.
Louise, I'll come to you in just a moment, but I saw William grinning broadly there. Do you want to come back on that?
Well, I just absolutely agree with everything Mr. Wang says. It's unfortunate that the negotiators, right, they say those words, but the policies, actions that are taken at home belie that. You cannot say we want to negotiate shared technologies and make the world better off and be able to have everyone benefit. At the same time, sanction the whole world against the use of technology. Now, the U.S. licensing technology has been targeted towards strategic industries, dual-use products that could be used for military purposes, and it's specifically targeted to certain countries. The licensing agreement that China has put in place has been to require that the entire world, right, be subject to that kind of sanction. So U.S. Has been very targeted and strategic, and China has been trying to keep its monopoly on the technologies that it has been so successful in developing.
William, the China model is often criticized in the West. Could it, though, that criticism be underestimating China's resilience and strength, taking into consideration its global reach, particularly in the global South, as well as in some European nations, which are clearly now reorienting towards the East?
There's a lot to be said for China's model. It is a hybrid model that has been adapting. Just to think about the historic reach it's had from a central planning style, originally the Soviet based, to Deng Xiaoping's experiment with market economy, and then the withdrawal from the experimentation of market economy toward the more directed model that President Xi has put in place. I think the criticism have been that there was not enough feedback from the markets toward adapting the production and the tactics, the implementation of the strategies. Central planning has always suffered from the inability to shift rapidly as conditions change, and to self-correct the excess production that has taken place and the insufficient consumption that you see in the economy. So I think the ability of China's to adapt its model has been really historic and really something to be applauded. But unfortunately, the speed with which it can do that is limited by the amount of central control, which actually has increased with President Xi over the years rather than decreased, to allow more flexibility from the markets.